You're listening to The Streaming Wars, the podcast that discusses all of the latest happenings regarding your favorite streaming services. Find out which service is winning the war this time around.
Hello everyone and welcome to the latest episode of The Streaming Wars. I'm Dustin and Tony is with me and we are here to discuss everything from June 24th to July 7th. Maybe asking yourself, what happened to the episode last week? Well, let me just take a quick moment to, one, thank everybody who reached out to us asking where the latest episode was, and quite honestly, looking for the new episode in general. We've gotten you guys to the point where you expect a new episode every single week, and I apologize, but the long short story is that I previously was in a house with my family. I lived there for about 10 years and I recently purchased a new house and moved, and while I was trying to get everything up and running to line up perfectly so that I could still record and get the show edited and get it out for on time as usual, it unfortunately just didn't work out that way. I was having some internet issues that I was having internet for about 24 hours and then it would completely crap out, and yeah, so long story short, I had bad internet, I moved, I've been extremely busy, and now I'm getting caught up. Of course, all of this happens, and the past 2 weeks have been chock full of news, way more than the last couple weeks prior to me moving, so I clearly picked the wrong time to move. But we have a ton of news to cover, and while we don't necessarily have a ton to actually discuss, there is an absolute stockpile of stuff that has been announced over the past couple weeks. So we're going to dive straight into the news and start off with Netflix. So first up, Chicken Run. Chicken Run was a film that came out 20 years ago, and there's a sequel from Aardman Animation that's going to be coming to Netflix in the future. Last Chance U is coming to an end, and there is a basketball spin-off that is currently coming up next. There's a film adaptation of Virunga, the documentary, that is in development. There is the upcoming video game Cyberpunk 2077 is getting an anime series. There is a Dutch series called Dirty Lines that has been ordered to series. There's a new limited series coming from Colin Kaepernick and Ava DuVernay. And then there is, Netflix is going to be adapting Dead India into an animated series. Pharrell Williams is going to be doing a series called Voices of Fire, which is a documentary series following gospel choirs. Then there is the Dead to Me creator, Les Feldman, has signed an overall deal with Netflix. And we've talked about this in the past, but to give a quick update, Aaron Sorkin's The Trial of the Chicago 7 is in fact heading to Netflix as we had previously reported, and that ended up being a deal for about $50 million. Now, specifically, I know we have talked about some of these movies and how they've been picked up in price, but in comparison, it is nowhere near as much as some of the projects that Apple has been spending feverishly at a very high rate for.
Agreed. I read this, and I think the headline is that, they bought Sorkin's Trial of Chicago 7 for $50 million. We're about to break that number in a little bit with another deal that Apple has done. Let's just say it's definitely over $50 million. And so I'm kind of surprised that it is for $50 million. I wonder what this is about the movie. In general, why Apple TV, I guess, didn't push the price higher, but I think it's resetting the market for what we think of these big movies and what are the numbers that we expect. Where it used to be that $50 million for a feature film was a lot and it was a big number to talk about, but then now it's kind of almost. I read the article and I was like, well, I thought it'd be a little bit more, just given who it was, the level, and the stuff like that. So. But yeah, it's Netflix is buying properties, so that's interesting.
Yeah, and it's especially interesting because I think a lot of people just associate Netflix with having the biggest piggy bank to spend on content, and while they certainly spend an enormous amount of money on content, it is interesting when we see some of these movie deals of movies that are, that were originally planned for theaters that are no longer going to be in theaters, and these services and how much they're willing to pay for these films. We know that Netflix has personally spent, upwards of $50 to $100 million on some of the films that their own original films that they've done in-house that have done very well for them and have garnered them a lot of attention. The one thing that I think that I would really want to know more about is how exactly it is that these films translate into subscribers. Obviously, they'll always tout if a movie is very successful, and they'll say how many people have actually watched it or give their they're convoluted numbers that sometimes don't mean anything to a normal person. But if you sit there and you say you've got 50 million people who watch the film in the first couple weeks, how does that actually translate into how much money they're actually spending? And that's the part that I would love to see a deep dive on. Hopefully our friend, the entertainment strategy guy, he puts something together in the future about that, because I think the biggest thing is when you have a film that does really well, or you get a film, and this also applies to a property like Hamilton. Hamilton was originally meant to be in theaters. Disney Plus needed some content. We know they spent $75 million on it earlier this year. They ended up releasing it exclusively on Disney Plus. And the question is, are people actually going to sign up for the service just for these projects? Now, Hamilton, I could honestly see it, and we're going to talk about that because we already actually know, based off of some app numbers, that people clearly have signed up for the service because of it. But when it comes to some of these films, I guess the question is, how is Netflix warranting $100 million for a film when even if 50 million people are watching it, some of those people are already subscribing? So how is it that they are okay with spending that much money, and how does that translate long term for the service? So I really like to see something about that. But another project that is actually going to be coming to Netflix is Cobra Kai, and you may be saying to yourself, wait, isn't that a YouTube original? And it was a YouTube original for the first 2 seasons. And we recently talked about how YouTube could be getting out of the original content game, at least as far as the original scripted content like we see here with Cobra Kai. However, we know that they are still actually creating some, I guess the best way to put it is YouTube-like content, similar to, creators just creating content the way we typically associate with YouTube, but not the original scripted series that we typically associate with streaming services. So Cobra Kai has actually been picked up by Netflix, and it's going to actually have the first 2 seasons available on Netflix as well. So if you are unable to actually check out Cobra Kai on YouTube, it'll be available on Netflix very soon, along with the 3rd season. And I guess the part to me that should be highlighted is the fact that this was one of the few series that ended up being successful enough at YouTube to keep getting multiple seasons. And it shows that YouTube just this isn't what their focus is, because if they were willing to let this show walk and it was as successful as it was, this is not their game. They're going to be focusing on some other things.
I read the news article a few days ago, and I was like, well, that's a little bit surprising. Just because Cobra Kai is one of the few pieces of content that YouTube Originals was actually successful at. And so that was surprising to me to see how they're basically giving their best piece of content, their golden goose per se. I just watched Willy Wonka this past weekend, to a major competitor, to Netflix, to the king of essentially streaming right now. So that was just a little bit surprising to me. So it's not so much a good thing for Netflix. I mean, it is a good thing for Netflix because it is a decent show and it's got a good following. And there's plenty of like spin-offs for the future and property, a lot of material that you can work with to sustain the Karate Kid, the Cobra Kai, whatever brand for the future. But for me, it's more indicative of YouTube and YouTube Originals and kind of how they move in. How they're going. I think that's just something that we need to keep a close eye on too, because they are still a little bit a part of this space. I know that they're kind of like almost more or less, I'd consider them a lot like Quibi or TikTok or Snapchat in the realm of just like short form content. And I know they have originals, but if you look at like the people who use their app and stuff like that, it's the metrics of how people use YouTube is very much like a mobile app. It's you pull up a video really quick, you watch it, then you put it away. Like you don't like binge content usually on YouTube on like your big TV or desktop monitor or something for a very long time. It's the usage rates of YouTube is very interesting. So I think it's just interesting to see how Google and YouTube are moving out of the original space, and maybe you're going to try to move into something a little bit different. But I know that they have been spending a lot of money. It doesn't seem like the investment has been worth it on there, and so it's weird to see just like the end of an era of YouTube Originals. I mean, I remember when it was them and like Yahoo Screen back in the day, how those brands were started, and how YouTube Screen obviously, Yahoo Screen is obviously not a thing anymore. And then YouTube Originals seems like it's transitioning out of what it used to be into something else. So just seems like the end of an era, which is not bad. It's not like sad or anything. It's just they realize that YouTube is not good for that area. So it was surprising.
All right, so then jumping over to Prime Video, there is a series called Nancy Wu Done It, which is coming to the service. Amazon has announced that they now have a watch party option available for Prime Video, and the Westworld creators putting together a series based on the video game franchise Fallout, and Amazon has committed to a series for that as well. The Westworld creators, Jonathan Nolan and Lisa Joy, they actually signed an exclusive with Amazon, and this is clearly the next property that they're going to be working on. And then finally, Amazon is expanding into live television. Their expansion into live television, that is, seems a little bit more likely. There's been some things popping up, some job things, and while Amazon has actually gone on to explain that that is not the case and that the translation of these positions is not related to live TV, I honestly believe it's only a matter of time before something like this actually occurs.
It's interesting. I mean, we were talking off air about some of the other players in the live television space, the streaming internet television space, and it seems that there are all these providers, and it seems like Hulu and YouTube TV are kind of the 1 and 2 in terms of the leaders in this space, but it doesn't seem like people are extremely satisfied with the product or satisfied as it could be, because I feel like there's still a lot of value. Although we talk about streaming and all this stuff, there's still a lot of value in traditional live programming. Either it's sports, or maybe you're doing an award show, or maybe it's just other content. Like people, instead of dealing with like normal cable in that way, just use your internet and stream stuff around. So I think that there's still a big giant pool of users who want traditional linear content. Obviously, we're moving away from that, but it doesn't seem like there's a product that's meeting people's needs in the best way possible. And I have a feeling that Amazon could steamroll the market. I mean, offer a decent service. Won't have all the bells and whistles, but we'll have decent service, decent content available pretty much whatever region you are, and the price is going to be a lot cheaper than some of these other competitors. I think that's going to be the key. And if you can offer live TV with all the regional deals working out and stuff like that with the normal Prime subscription, I mean, that's huge. I mean, paying $100 to get 2-day shipping or better, depending on where you live, Prime Video, Prime Live TV, Prime Music. I mean, like that's a hell of a deal. And so if they can deliver a quality product like that, I think that's going to really disrupt the market, and it's really going to set Amazon even further ahead of their peers. So this is interesting, and I'm curious, and we're just going to watch it even more. But hopefully this does mean that they are investing more into live television. And we've seen them dabble more and more recently. I mean, they had that initial deal with NFL football to do Thursday night games, and then now they've really stepped up with
the Premier League.
Premier League. I know they re-upped their NFL deal. They're doing a Saturday playoff game if the NFL is ever going to be back in season. So like they've really stepped up their foot in live television and live programming, and they kind of feel about live events, and hopefully they can make that transition. And I think that if they get in the game and they really put their foot to it, it can really disrupt the market. And I think it can also help anecdotally with sales of their like Fire devices too, because if you have the live cable, you need you don't need a cable box, but you need kind of some interface there, and I think that's another big selling point for their Fire devices and stuff like that. So that's just something else to kind of think about as well. But overall, this potentially could be extremely nice and convenient for Prime users.
And the other part of it is that they can implement IMDb TV, which we'll talk about a little bit more, but IMDb TV is kind of their Philo, their Pluto TV version of what Amazon offers, where it's free content, ad-supported, and it's only a matter of time before that somehow gets rolled into it. We know Peacock is kind of a larger service that's going to have multiple different tiers, including a free tier. I honestly think that it makes perfect sense for Amazon to have something like this and to also implement live TV. And like you were saying, because they could steamroll the industry, they could actually drive the price down. And that's part of the reason why I think so many other companies are having issues. We're going to talk about some streaming cord-cutting services in a little bit here with some price increases, but it's not uncommon for this to continuously happen. I mean, obviously when cord-cutting services like Hulu first existed, it wasn't anywhere near the price it is now, and it's slowly creeping up towards the cost of what you would typically find with cable. And the problem is that's the whole reason why people left cable in the first place, was a higher price. But Amazon has been known to enter into an industry and completely change the narrative, at least of how things are run, because they'll go in and they have no problem losing money for a little while. If you want a great example, but has nothing to do with what we talk about here, there was a website called diapers.com. They actually used to be the top seller for diapers, and Amazon went and did their own diaper division and then ended up underpricing the diapers, where diapers.com, they lost money, and Amazon had absolutely no problem losing money continuously for as long as it took to basically end diapers.com's reign. And then Amazon bought diapers.com. So it's not to say that it couldn't happen again, but I think live TV could be a great option. And at least for a consumer, it could be a great option, because not that I want Amazon to be, the massive monopoly of every industry there is, but I believe that if Amazon got into live TV, it could actually drive some of the prices down for some of the other services, because they just would have to compete and figure out some way of doing it. And Amazon's not afraid to just say no to networks or media companies and things like that, because we've seen that happen. So, all right, so jumping over to Hulu. Hulu has landed 2 highly anticipated FX series as originals. Now, you may be saying to yourself, of course Hulu has got FX series, because FX on Hulu, that was a thing back a couple months ago. And yes, it is. But there was 2 series, specifically the American Horror Stories, which is the spin-off series, that one, as well as Why the Last Man, which is a series that has been in the works for almost 10 years, I think. Those 2 series were actually planned on being on FX, but due to, I guess, the programming block or whatever, they're actually going to be exclusively on Hulu now. So while they are technically FX originals, they will not broadcast on FX, which means the idea of FX on Hulu is becoming even more, it's evolving even more, because now FX is going to be creating content exclusively for Hulu and won't even be airing it on its broadcast channel. It shows the focus is, of course, on streaming. And then the other Hulu news is that Jamie Oliver's cook show that he did during quarantine is also going to be coming to Hulu as well. Jumping over to CBS All Access, the SpongeBob film is the latest animated film to head over to paid video on demand, PVOD, and then streaming. Specifically, it was planned for release, I believe, in August. It's now going to be doing the same thing that Scoob and Trolls did, where it is available for rental ahead of time, and then it'll actually be coming to the streaming service that's Viacom CBS is still creating, but for now it will be paid video on demand. All right, Apple TV Plus. There's a bunch of stuff here. First up, Apple has acquired a con artist feature film called Sharper, which will star Julianne Moore. There's a murder mystery comedy series called The After Party that's from Phil Lord and Chris Miller. There is an Israeli neo-noir series called Losing Alice that is also coming to Apple TV. Mark Bomback, who is the showrunner of Defending Jacob, has inked an overall deal with Apple. The foundation for Maurice Sendak, who is the creator of Where the Wild Things Are, that foundation has struck an overall deal with Apple, where Apple will be creating content based on Maurice Sendak's work. Apple has purchased Will Smith's latest film called Emancipation for over $100 million. When I say over $100 million, it was actually closer to $120 million according to some industry insiders. So that is by far the most expensive film that has landed on a streaming service. We know that Greyhound was $70 million. We talked about how The Trial of the Chicago 7 was $50 million at Netflix, but $120 million is an insane amount of money, and it came down to Warner Media trying to purchase it and Apple. And Warner Media, I think, had every intention of releasing in theaters, not just bringing it over to HBO Max, but Apple bought it, and I believe the details of this is that it's still going to release in theaters, but it's going to have a bigger release than, let's say, like The Banker or some of the other films that Apple has been dealing with. But $120 million. I mean, obviously, the title Emancipation should tell you what it's about, and obviously it's a very timely story, but wow, $120 million.
I mean, I was reading the article, and I feel like personally it is a great story, and I think they got a great actor, and I think it's moving, it's compelling. I mean, it's based on true story, and so it's got this like, real component with it, and it hits hard to a lot of things that are going on right now in America, the United States of America. Personally, I feel it that way, but I think also it's just going to be good, television, a good movie experience. And I don't want to disrespect the film for saying that, but I feel like you can think of it objectively, and it's like, okay, I think the audiences will like it, and there's going to be a lot of interest in it. But when I read this, and then also kind of comparing a little bit with the Netflix story about how they bought that property for $50 million. And I made a comment of like, it just seems that the new normal is actually, I felt that $50 million was kind of, it's seemingly low just given the amount of Apple coverage we've done recently. I have a concern that maybe Apple is resetting the market for a lot of these films and properties, in that They just did Greyhound, you said, for 70 million. I'm pretty sure that there was some other movie recently that was 80 million. The Banker was at the time kind of expensive when it was purchased. So we made comments the past few episodes of how Apple is behind and they're in a big spending spree to catch up. And I think that they've done well. And I feel like the content that they're buying is going to be good. And it's going to be stuff that people are going to like to watch. And instead of kind of going a whole Moneyball type approach, and it just seems like, okay, let's just get big name actors, big stories, and let's just go for it. So kind of old school Hollywood, and that's fine. But it seems like they're going to be resetting the market for the future. And I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that? It's like, okay, well, what do you have these creators who are going to try to shop around their content? And it's like, we saw what Apple does, and they've done 100 million a couple times. I think that I'm worth 100 million, or this property's worth 100 million. I'm concerned that maybe Apple is overpricing, is overspending, and it's going to reset the market for these properties. And it's really, at the end of the day, it's going to set back streaming services because it's going to really just push their budgets even more. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I agree. Honestly, it's going to come down to the fact that Apple has a huge amount of money that they can spend. They don't have a problem holding back on the amount of money that they can spend, but that can create a larger problem for the industry because you start having projects that are being bought for larger amounts of money than they really should be. And this is no judgment against these projects that have recently come up with Greyhound or Emancipation or even the Trial of the Chicago 7. I'm sure a lot of these projects are really great. I haven't seen any of them, obviously, so it's going to be very difficult to sit here and say, was this worth as much money as they paid? But
I'm curious about the capitalization of these properties and how are they going to get the return of investment?
Yeah.
And how do you quantify that? And at a certain point, I feel like the market's just going to be like, hey, the asking price on these properties is just so high that we're either going to go with a bunch of like Sundance films and stuff that no one knows about, or going to develop in-house or something crazy, or going to have a few streaming services just overspend on a whole lot of money, accrue a whole lot of corporate debt, and then can never get their way out of it. I mean, Apple's a unique case because they just have a whole lot of cash at hand, but not every streaming service is like that. Warner Media, like AT&T, just has a whole lot of corporate debt in general that some consider unhealthy. You have Netflix, which has a healthy amount of debt. Some insiders are a little bit worried, but for the most part, I mean, Netflix seemingly is doing well, and their expansion is good. I mean, you have Disney Plus, who like they have money, but it doesn't seem like it's the most prudent for them to get a whole bunch of business loans and go into to accrue a lot of corporate debt. So it's going to be balancing that line between debt versus, I guess, like doing it in-house or finding something cheaper. I don't know, but I'm just concerned as the industry is as Apple's pushing forward with higher and higher deals, and now we're having more participants in the streaming space for these high-priced content. I'm just concerned that there's going to be some artificial bubble that's going to happen sometime soon. And what are the downstream effects? Or can we even enumerate them right now? Or just, that's my warning hat is just on, and I'm just a little bit concerned about a potential bubble happening in the space.
Well, the real question should be, if Apple has absolutely no problem spending as much money as they are on these individual films or projects, they could have used money collectively to go purchase a studio. They could have bought MGM, and they could have had a huge group of content that they could have used right out the gate to bolster their library. They could have had existing executives come in and help create content specifically for the service. They could have even potentially, this wouldn't have been as cheap as MGM, but they could have maybe gone after, Sony. Sony has created a ton of content. They're the only one that's kind of like weaving
and
around.
How many Sony execs have left?
Exactly.
Former Sony execs left Sony and gone to Apple. I mean,
yeah. That's the next piece of news, which is Chris Parnell, who is the Sony Pictures TV Studios co-president. He actually exited Sony, and he's now the senior TV programming executive. And this isn't the first one that this has happened with. It just comes to question of why is it that their focus is buying these individual projects and not looking for a larger long-term goal of we need to be able to create content ourselves in-house, which they clearly are doing with their TV shows. But when it comes to these films, it seems like purchasing them is just the easier route. And I understand that is the way sometimes Hollywood works when it comes to certain projects. Obviously, you have Sundance, you have Cannes, you have Tribeca Film Festival. You have these film festivals that the independent filmmakers, they bring their projects to and look for someone to purchase them. And it's almost always the larger studios that are going to purchase them and pay the money for them. And Apple just happens to have the money to pay for for it, but it does go along with what you said. Eventually, you're going to keep spending too much. You're going to eventually push everything so high that the bubble has to pop. Honestly, over the next couple of months, if we keep hearing stories of Apple spending $50, $100 million or more on these various projects, I just don't know if that's going to be the right way to go about doing what they're doing. Obviously, they have new content coming. They have new seasons of some of their shows. They have content. They just don't have a ton. And a single movie, however, is a lot of money to spend on something where, I mean, how many people are actually signing up for Apple TV Plus because of one single movie? And that's not to say anything.
Capital intensive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but I want to get into Disney Plus because specifically it goes along with kind of what happened with Hamilton. And let's just talk about that first. So Hamilton came out, and as we talked about the last episode, Disney Plus got rid of their free trial option, and we knew this was probably likely going to be the case because of Hamilton, specifically because Hamilton is a film. It's not a TV series that airs every single week. It's a film of a musical that was, put on Broadway, and there's no real money for Disney Plus to give away free trials and have everybody who wants to see Hamilton come in and watch it for free during a free trial. So conveniently, the free trial disappears. They have people, and then of course news comes out that the app downloads, they increased by 72% over the course of the last week when Hamilton, around the time that Hamilton released, which is huge because when you look at that number of app downloads, well, that number does not immediately translate to a specific amount of customers directly because the app, somebody could subscribe and then download it on their phone and then download it somewhere else. But that number is huge because specifically that means that all the people who signed up for Disney Plus around that time probably did it for Hamilton, and they paid for at least 1 month of service because there is no free trial. And this just goes in line with Apple. Like, if you're looking at Apple and Apple's trying to find that magical project that's going to draw in a bunch of customers and then hopefully keep customers around or subscribers around, I just don't know that any of these specific projects are the thing that's going to draw in a humongous group of subscribers. I mean, like, I assure you that all of the projects that they've purchased, they have a following. People will watch it. I'm interested in seeing Greyhound, but I just don't know if any of these are going to be enough to draw in subscribers like something like Hamilton did for Disney Plus.
Well, I think Hamilton's in a very unique situation because it originally debuted off Broadway, 2015, then Broadway 2016. This was filmed in 2016, and it's been on the road up until COVID pandemic. There's a big initial surge in terms of popularity and social awareness in terms of marketing and stuff like that. So people already knew about Hamilton, and there are people that I know who've seen it, but it's just really hard to get tickets to Hamilton, either too expensive or even if you can afford them, you have to know the right people just due to that they're always being sold out. I mean, Hamilton just it was a great production and just you couldn't get tickets for it. And so I think that there was already a lot of awareness around with the population of, okay, what is Hamilton? We've heard of Hamilton. People maybe we've listened to the soundtrack, And so when you release Hamilton on Disney Plus, people already knew about Hamilton. Oh, let me go check it out. I'll go watch it and I'll go pay the subscription. So, I mean, I think that it's a very unusual situation because it's had over 5 years of essentially releasing trailers and advertising and press comparatively maybe to Greyhound, which has been pretty much in a big press campaign the past 2 weeks. I feel like I've just seen a whole lot more just trailers for it on the platforms that I'm on or ads for it. And so I feel like Hamilton's a very unique situation because people will already know about it. I have to say personally, I enjoyed Hamilton. I like the story a lot. After working in AV for a few years, audiovisuals, and having friends in the industry, I had a chat with a few of them and really were impressed with the level of just the production quality of it was just really nice. And I didn't feel like I was just watching some play in a boring theater, in a gym, that could put you to sleep. I felt I was a part of the universe. I felt I was part of the world. They did a good job with set design and the lighting to make you feel like you're in different places. Even on a stage, it made you feel like there was space there. So I thought that was pretty cool. And I guess if you were to compare it, I think the easiest way to compare it and the biggest thing you compare it to is maybe a movie called Les Miserables that came out a few years ago with Hugh Jackman and Gerard Butler in Anne Hathaway. But that movie, it cost a lot to produce because it had real sets. I mean, is a legitimate movie, plus you're singing on top of it as well. So there's a whole lot of production cost incurred there. Whereas in, this film, Hamilton, like the production cost itself is like order of magnitude less than a normal movie. And so although Disney did pay a lot of money for the rights of Hamilton, they didn't have to, the cost in terms of initial capital wasn't that much. And so I can see, content like Hamilton being produced more and more. I think it's a great way, one, for Broadway to just, in this area of COVID-19, and it seems like it's going to be hard to move past this for a long time. I think it's a good way to spread Broadway and new stories and stories that we've known for a while out into the world, and taping these live shows, because we're not all going to go back to New York sometime soon, or to a city with a decent enough Broadway theater or off-Broadway theater to watch Wicked or some other production. And I feel like it's a great way for these streaming providers as well as to offer content that, one, people are going to go back to watch Hamilton just over and over again. People still go to see Broadway theater. Even if they've seen the show multiple times, they'll still go back to go see it again. And so I feel like this is also like decent evergreen content as well. I'm happy for Hamilton. I enjoyed it. But yes, I do agree that long term, Hamilton is just such a unique position in comparison to maybe the properties that Apple's bought or Netflix just bought, just because it had that 5-year lead up to it. So, I'm still, it's only been a few days as we record this podcast of when Hamilton was released. So probably next episode, there's probably going to be a lot more hard numbers on, social media engagement, true subscriber numbers, more effects than just mobile app downloads. So I'm curious for next week's episode as we get more numbers to share them with everyone.
Yeah, we'll also have Disney quarterly results soon, and I'm sure they'll be touting the success of Hamilton as well. So, all right, so then other Disney Plus news, Beyonce is going to be premiering a visual album called Black is King on the service, and then Disney Plus is going to head to 8 more European countries on September 15th, specifically Portugal, Belgium, Finland, Iceland, Luxembourg, Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. They will all be getting the service on September 15th. Jumping over to Quibi, Gia Coppola has a dark romance series called Love, Lindsay Forever that is currently in development. An at-home fan remake of Princess Bride is premiering on Quibi. Quibi is developing a murder mystery series with Blumhouse Television. And then finally, there's a retrospective of Quibi as the initial free trial period ends that was popped up over on Vulture. It's a long article, but it is a great read and it combines a lot of the stuff we've already heard about how Whitman and Katzenberg have had issues with each other and they've clashed at various points. It gives a little bit more in depth into that. It also talks a little bit more about the fact that Katzenberg, his work ethic and how that affects the company as a whole. It's a really good read. It actually appeared in the New Yorker before it appeared online on Vulture. But definitely give it a read if you're interested in hearing more about the history of Quibi and how it's slowly dying. So, yeah. All right. HBO Max. Tons of stuff. HBO Max has ordered an anthology series called Outliers. The first one will focus on Dr. Anthony Fauci. There's a coming-of-age feature called We Were There Too, which is heading to the service. Their HBO Max has teamed with iHeartMedia for more companion podcasts, specifically related to their original content that is on the service. Gone with the Wind has returned to HBO Max with a contextual intro. The new dystopian thriller In Memoriam is in development. HBO Max has signed Marlon Wayans to an overall deal with multiple projects already underway. The DC Universe original series, Harley Quinn, will be coming to HBO Max. HBO Max has acquired David Makes a Man from OWN. The Cartoon Network series Infinity Train has moved over to HBO Max for its 3rd season, and the first 2 seasons are also available immediately on HBO Max. And then finally, Warner Media CEO has discussed the ad-supported version of HBO Max. Now, this article appeared on The Information. The link is there. It is behind a paywall, but to give you a basic idea of what was there. It was a really in-depth article talking about Jason Kilar and his process of how he came in basically 4 weeks prior to HBO Max launching and how he's trying to change the focus from being so focused on advertisers and cable companies to, shifting the focus to the consumer and how to better the experience for the consumer, because long-term, that's what's more important than the cable companies and the advertisers. So there was some talk about the ad-supported version version. He specifically was quoted to say that he was shown an ad-supported model. He then went back to them and said, no, it's too expensive and you have too many ads. You've got to figure out a different way of doing this. So we already knew that there was an ad-supported version of HBO Max that is in the works, but this just further confirms that it is in works right now, and they're, gradually trying to figure out how to make it work so that it's a good price point that they can be competitive with the other streaming services. There was one other real quick comment that was in there. It specifically dealt with the Harry Potter films. I think a lot of people were taken surprised by the fact that all 8 Harry Potter films appeared on the service day one, and that was not previously announced, or they did not even talk about it. And those who are familiar with the licensing rights of Harry Potter would know that NBC Universal had a multi-year deal in place to license all the Harry Potter films, specifically for their cable services like Sci-Fi and USA, but that deal was good till 2025, and it turns out for the months leading up to HBO Max's launch, Warner Media was trying to figure out a way to get the streaming rights to the Harry Potter films specifically for HBO Max, and it turned out that Killer called the CEO of NBC Universal, Jeff Shell, and basically worked out a deal the night before the launch of HBO Max, according to the article. I don't know, obviously, the terms of the deal or anything like that, but it's a great thing that somebody who's so new to the company was able to come in and actually work out a deal that allowed those films to be on there potentially less than 24 hours before the service actually launched, which is great. So definitely worth the read if you can check it out. But like I said, it is behind a paywall. All right, so then jumping over to Peacock. Peacock has announced that they have teamed with Google. They will be on Google devices when they launch for their national expansion in July. Peacock has also bulked up their library with a number of Viacom CBS properties through a licensing deal, specifically films and certain shows that previously appeared on CBS channels like Charmed, which was originally back on the CW and the WB years ago, but was produced by CBS, and then Ray Donovan, which was recently on Showtime, along with shows like The Godfather, which is from Paramount. Peacock is going to have some of that content immediately on their service for launch. Now, the one thing I will say about that is odd, considering just last episode we were talking about how Bob Bakish, the CEO of Viacom CBS, was saying that they were going to hold the rights to a lot of their properties, or at least their major properties, the way he said it. They were going to hold their rights back so that they could have it on their own service. Now, there's nothing to say that these rights are only going to be good for like maybe 6 months until NBC Universal has a little bit more original content available for the service, or just more content in general that is freed up, because we know The Office is coming at the end of 2020. Parks and Rec is going to be coming. So we know that there's more content coming, but it's more of a question of, did they just strike up this licensing deal for a short amount of time so that they have more content while Viacom CBS is still working out whatever they're going to do with their streaming service that we know isn't coming until actual 2021. I thought that was very interesting. And then finally, Peacock is also very unlikely to make deals with Roku and Amazon prior to their national launch. Now, this obviously correlates with what we've been talking about with HBO Max for the last couple weeks, in the fact that that deal was not able to be secured by Warner Media with Roku and Amazon. They've had their own fair share of issues with those two services. But the biggest thing is Roku and Amazon, they make up 70% of the streaming devices that people are using. And it turns out Peacock isn't going to be able to make those deals happen either. My take on that is that Disney somehow was able to make it work for their service, and that was the last one that probably got through. And I guarantee you that Viacom CBS, when it eventually comes around, they're going to have their own issues with Roku and Amazon, unless some of these other companies resolve some of the issues. It does show that there's going to be some major problems with how these services are accepting the outside larger services as competition for some of their own stuff that they're doing. So definitely something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading that article and I was thinking, I was like, man, this is really good content discussing HBO Max stuff as well, as we've discussed the feud between HBO Max and Roku and Amazon. So I felt that was it was pretty interesting just to see that this is becoming more of a larger problem. Like, it's not just, Roku and Amazon are picking fights with an individual company. It seems that there's really an impasse between if you want to think about it as the distributors and as the content producers. Sometimes like it's a little bit of both, but if you want to think of the streaming space as the distributors and then also the content producers, it's that divide seems to grow even more. But I feel like CBS All Access and Viacom CBS, whatever their future name is going to be, they might have a better time than maybe some of these other companies, just because the CBS All Access app is already out there and it's already out on these properties, and it has both the ad supported and the ad free models in those apps already. So they have the baseline to work off. Obviously, it's going to be, in terms of like game theory, I guess it makes sense that both sides want to renegotiate the deal as when the time comes. But at least that they have a framework of what works, what doesn't work, in a model for the future. Whereas in HBO Max, pretty much doesn't have a roadmap for the future of how we're going to work with selling subscriptions and ads and stuff like that. So like overall, it was a very informative ad, and I highly recommend that people check out the show notes and read, because it was very informative. Yes.
All right. So then jumping over to some niche streaming services, ESPN Plus, they have announced that they are going to be increasing their service to $5.99 starting in August. DC Universe subscribers have been offered an HBO Max add-on essentially for a very discounted rate of only additional $5. DC Universe has also announced, well, not they haven't announced, but it has been announced that the DC Universe original DC Stargirl is going to be leaving the service for their second season. Now, the current season, first season, is airing right now. It's premiering on DC Universe on Mondays, and I believe it's appearing on CW on Tuesdays, but it's basically like a day away, and then it's appearing on CW. Now, that wasn't obviously originally the case. Originally, it was meant to be a DC Universe exclusive series, and as the show was created, word out there from some insiders was that the series was costing a little bit more than they anticipated, so they went and shopped it to the CW, and the CW was like, yeah, we could easily use this as one of our summer programming shows, because they were looking for content for the summer, and that's what ended up happening. However, now it appears that CW has picked it up for a second season, but DC Universe is not involved, which means if you're watching it on DC Universe for the first season, you'll need to swap over to CW to watch it. And conveniently, it also has been announced that it will then be on CW Seed, or the CW streaming service that they offer, with ads just like usual with the other CW properties. And then it will also end up on HBO Max down the line. But it shows again that DC Universe is in a situation where they're losing content, their original content that they had when they first launched. They had Titans and Young Justice. Later on, it was announced that the Harley Quinn series, we just talked about how that's going to be moving over to HBO Max. Not as if it's permanently moving just over to HBO Max, but it will also be available on HBO Max. Then you've got the Stargirl series, which will no longer be on DC Universe with new episodes. There's just not a lot of original content left. At this rate, Doom Patrol also moved over, and we'll still have episodes on DC Universe, but right now, all we've really got is Titans and Young Justice Outsiders, which conveniently, when you look at those two series, they're also the two series that I believe had licensing rights with Netflix when it came to international situations. So it'll be interesting to see what ends up happening with those series, because if DC Universe morphs into something more fan-oriented, where they keep the community aspect and the comic books, the digital comic book library that they have, and potentially lower the price or keep the price the same, or they just have some content that's media related but they stay away from the original content. The other part was that recently, just this past week, DC Daily, which was a series or a show that was on DC Universe every single day, almost every single day since they launched, they wrapped up, and that show was essentially canceled as well. So it shows that DC Universe is focusing less on the original content. There's going to be less and less content in general coming to the service, and then when that happens, it's only a matter of time before it either gets completely absorbed or turns into what I believe. My belief is that what's going to happen is that it's going to just become a fan community and then a digital library for the comics, and that's what the focus is going to be, and the original streaming stuff is just non-existent.
I'm actually in favor of this. There are some fans of mine in the comic space that really want DC Universe to be its own show. To be its own service. And I feel like there's no way that DC Universe can create enough content on its own to justify. There's no simple way to say it, just business-wise, it doesn't make sense for DC Universe to still continue when you have HBO Max. You have studios and personnel over at a sister department that can create more content at a faster pace than DC Universe could. That's just the way it is. And since the DC Universe is so niche, from AT&T's perspective, it makes sense that why are we going to have a dedicated line just for DC Universe content? It just doesn't make sense. So I do appreciate them moving and simplifying essentially the whole library. I know when we first started the podcast, I made a few complaints about, Warner Media and AT&T's decision to still keep up with a lot of these different subdivisions. But I think that they've recognized that there is some confusion in their market or in their products, I guess, and they're trying to simplify that a little bit. But given the licensing structures with Netflix and other partners, I understand why they couldn't do it immediately. But there's a slow focus of, hey, let's just move it to HBO Max. One, you're going to have all of the streaming content there under one head, under one roof, and it just makes a lot of sense. But then two, you can transition DC Universe to maybe something a little bit more, and you can spin it off to be an even more profitable unit potentially than what it is right now. And I think that they should focus on really a subscription aspect of comics, because it is a great service. When you talk about comics and as somebody who just enjoys comics, I feel like it is a very good alternative to what it is out there. I mean, $5 a month, you could pick up any comic that's over a year old. I feel like that's a great offer. So I'm overall happy with this move. There are some that I know that are not happy, but you just gotta understand that business-wise, it doesn't make sense for DC Universe. When you have HBO Max, and as it's going to continue to grow, to keep around a streaming service, to try to pump out content, to keep subscribers when there's only such a small subscriber count. And unfortunately, superhero shows do require a good amount of CGI and stuff, so it potentially could drain a lot of money. It's one of those properties, it's that type of property that can drain and can cause big budgets and stuff like that. So overall, I'm happy with this, but it's nice to see that HBO Max has a plan for DC Universe and integrating that content.
All right, and then finally, the service we talked about earlier, IMDb TV, has landed Mad Men in a complex licensing deal. Well, I'm not going to go into the details of the licensing deal itself. I will say it's surprising that Mad Men has landed at a service like IMDb TV, specifically because IMDb TV is ad-supported, and that show, I mean, it's a very popular show that I would imagine would typically end up, at a Netflix or even Prime Video for that matter. But instead, Amazon has paid for the rights specifically to have it on their free version. And I think it goes along with what I was saying earlier about how eventually there has to be a plan for Amazon to incorporate that IMDb TV into Prime Video in some way, even with the ad-supported version, just so that they can have, they can bring in more people and obviously bring in more revenue. There's got to be a point in time where IMDb TV becomes part of Prime Video and you can actually watch the content within Prime Video, because even if it's not content that's free, if it's labeled as if it's not free and you have to watch ads and it's just part of, what IMDb TV offer, or as what Prime Video offers as part of IMDb TV, I think it makes sense. I think that it goes along with what I said earlier about how Peacock has multiple tiers, and I think that Prime Video could have multiple tiers as well. They offer a free version, which I think should be reclassified as not necessarily called IMDb TV, because that's just too many letters in my opinion. But I think that it would make sense for them to have like a free tier to get in, and then also offer potentially some of that other Amazon content at an ad-supported level, because I think there are people who would, and then it could potentially get more people to sign up for Prime Video. The thing is, we also know that the focus within Amazon is not necessarily to create some sort of massive, humongous streaming service like Netflix. They're content with creating a good amount of content, licensing some content, but the reality is that maybe there's a lot more things in the works along with this live TV option that we keep hearing about. Maybe there's more things at play within Amazon than a lot of people realize.
It's interesting to see how IMDb TV, man, that's just really hard to say multiple times on and off air, man. That's a bunch of word soup going on, but I think that this is good. I think right now it's IMDb TV seems like one of the only few alternatives out there that's actually getting decently big name content. There's some other AVOD stuff that's out there. It doesn't have as near as big as titles as IMDb TV, and so getting Mad Men is actually kind of huge. And it used to be on Netflix, and I don't know what happened to it after a few years ago when I stopped watching it, but it used to be there, and getting something like Mad Men is pretty huge. So kudos to IMDb TV, and I'm curious to see what Amazon's going to do with this property in the future.
All right, and then finally, some other streaming providers, specifically the cord-cutting services. YouTube TV has announced that they're increasing their monthly rate 30% from $50 to $65. Fubo TV has also announced that they're raising their rates, and the Warner Media networks are going to be leaving, while the Disney networks will actually join the service. So you won't be able to watch TNT, TBS, Cartoon Network, CNN, but you will, however, be able to watch ESPN, the Disney Channel, Disney Junior, things like that. So I don't know that I would sit there and say immediately that gaining the Disney is better than the Warner Media, or vice versa, but I will say that they're raising their rates regardless of what's going on. And then Sling TV, and this isn't in the show notes, this is just kind of like a note that I came across, but while all of these services, we also know that Hulu raised their prices earlier this year. We know that they've been losing subscribers at a very rapid rate, and those who don't know, Sling TV is actually owned by Dish Network, and that was Dish's way of getting subscribers and customers in general outside of the actual satellite, was Sling TV. And these live TV options, they're only good for two things at this point. They're only good for sports and news. That's the whole point of them. But specifically when it comes to sports, there isn't any real sports right now. We've got word that some of the leagues are going to start picking back up, or figuring out some way of doing something and continuing, or cutting their seasons in half and things like that. But sports as a whole are nowhere near as what they were in the past. So it does beg the question of, is this live option even a real thing? And the only other thing that's out there is the news. And while cable news obviously garners ratings and things like that, I'm not sure that a lot of people are wanting to pay, $65 a month for the option of watching cable news with no sports whatsoever. It's just, this is a bad time for these price hikes, just because of one of the two reasons that you would typically use these services, which is live sports. It's unfortunate, but anyway, Sling TV, they have been losing subscribers, and they took the opportunity. They took this announcement of these different services raising their rates as a marketing opportunity, and decided to tell everybody, hey, if you come to Sling TV, we are guaranteeing that we won't raise our rates for the next year, which is great for anybody who's a Sling TV customer. But we already know that there's not that many of them left, because they're leaving in large droves. So that's one thing to consider. If you are a live TV subscriber, your rates are going to keep going up. There's very few that their rates aren't going up. The big ones, Hulu, YouTube, Fubo TV, all of these are going up, and it's just a matter of business. And the question is, as more and more cable companies, more and more people leave the cable companies and cord cut and switch over to these, internet live TV options like YouTube TV, Fubo TV, and Hulu, the question really is going to be, how long will it be before these prices start to inch closer and closer and closer to those cable prices that everybody wanted to get away from in the first place? It's just something to keep in mind if you're a cord cutter. I personally, when I moved, one of the things that I did was I did not sign up for cable TV. I do have obviously a number of streaming services. Just keep it in mind that if you're cord cutting, your cord cutting cost savings is going down very rapidly.
I agree. I think it's a shame that these services are raising rates just so fast. I think part of it is just the world that we live in right now, that they're probably hemorrhaging subscribers due to no one really being interested. There's no sports going on. There's nothing on live television that's that convincing to stick around for. And so that's a little bit surprising. And I think it's sad, and that's why they're raising rates. So it's understandable. But I think also just it seems that the demand for live television is just, it's becoming even more niche, regardless of the outside economics of the world and stuff like that. But it's becoming more niche, and cable providers are also realizing that actually you can make there's still a significant amount of money with live television and streaming that. And I think that they've upped their prices as well. So I feel like some of these companies are in a between the rock and hard place, because they're small enough in subscriber numbers to not have the weight to push around and push back on some deals, but at the same time, they don't have enough to cover the costs of the industry. And so maybe somebody like Amazon getting in the game, and with the weight and clout of Amazon and just it being Amazon, it could be potentially more efficient. It might be able to move the game a little bit forward. It might become even more cost effective and cost friendly for consumers. So I think that there's a lot there, but yes, increasing monthly rate by 30% is kind of ridiculous.
So that's going to wrap up this episode of the Streaming Wars. I do want to encourage everyone to check out the show notes. There is a massive amount of over 50 different trailers that have actually released over the past 2 weeks, so definitely check out the show notes. You can find the show notes on the streamingwars.io, obviously, as well as the show notes themselves. If you are looking for links directly to them, we do enable those links over on the website, so definitely check that out. If you are so inclined, definitely check out our Twitter and our Instagram, as well as we have a Discord. We post all the articles that we discuss here on the podcast on our Twitter and on our Discord. And Instagram we specifically use for all of the announcements related to new episodes of the podcast releasing. Outside of that, I do want to encourage you, if you could please take the time to leave a review wherever you are listening to this podcast. That is always greatly appreciated. 5-star reviews are great, but any constructive criticism is always welcome as well. You can also send us an email at thestreamingwars@gmail.com with any questions, comments, concerns, topics you'd like us to discuss, or things or different questions you'd like us to answer. We are always looking for feedback and comments from our listeners. So with all of that being said, for Tony and myself, this has been the Streaming Wars, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks for listening to the Streaming Wars. Check us out on Twitter and Instagram. Also consider supporting us on Patreon. Links can be found at thestreamingwars.io.